Hey everyone, if you love Dragon Ball and you enjoy the content I put out here on Geekdom 101, make sure you punch that subscribe button and the bell so you don't miss out on a video every time I upload, and I thank you for your continued support. Back in the 80s, when Toriyama was writing the original manga and got to the Dragon Ball Z part, he introduced Gohan, and it's unclear as to whether or not he had plans for Gohan from the beginning, but one could infer, based on how Gohan was written, that Toriyama did have big plans for him, and even though he is known as a discovery writer who pretty much makes it up as he goes along, it's pretty clear he had some kind of plan for Gohan, and that of course would end up coming to fruition in the Cell games when Gohan would ultimately become the hero and take the torch from his father, Son Goku, albeit for a limited time. Toriyama's writing isn't really the best in history, let's be real about it, but when you go back and really examine things like the Cell Saga, you come to find out there are little intricacies and thought-provoking storytelling elements that aren't really easy to spot on the surface, but when you sit back and think about, it's almost kind of mind-blowing. And to me, the one I would like to discuss here on this edition of Dragon Ball In Depth is the way that Toriyama juxtapositioned future Gohan from present Gohan. The reality is, if you examine Dragon Ball with a fine-tooth comb, you come to find out that future Gohan is the key to everything, and really equally as important as present Gohan. Yes, he is. Let's go and take a deep dive into Dragon Ball right now. So I've watched Dragon Ball Z a bunch of times, and I'm sure it's the same thing for many of you. We've watched this show for years in a bunch of different languages and kind of dissected it up and down, but every time that I watch it, I always find something interesting and something new that I really dig. And even though this video is about Gohan, the Cell Saga itself has tons of intricacies. I did do a Dragon Ball In Depth discussing a lot of the deeper elements of the Cell Saga. It's called The Themes of the Cell Saga, so check that out if you haven't. But one of the things that I found to be very poetic about this arc is the fact that no matter what they tried to do, no matter what the future versions, I guess you can say, of Trunks and Bulma try to do to prevent Goku from dying, ultimately he died anyways. But it was very poetic at the fact that Goku chose to sacrifice himself to save the Earth in the present timeline, as opposed to him dying in the future timeline of a heart virus. So even though the heart medicine and Goku training to become stronger may have prolonged his life, he wound up dying anyways. And to me, that's always been a bit of poetic irony. That being said, though, of course he would come back 7 years later and things would be okay again. Future Goku never came back, which to me is one of the many tragedies of the future timeline, of Trunks' timeline. And if you remember, Trunks' timeline is actually supposed to be the main timeline. Had Trunks not gone back and split the timeline up, that was supposed to be the dark fate of our characters. Toriyama gave us the best possible view of this timeline back on August 11th, 1992's issue of Weekly Shonen Jump, where he published Trunks the Story, a Lone Warrior, which would later become adapted into the anime as the History of Trunks TV special, which a lot of people love. But the story originated in the manga first, in this special bonus chapter that was all about the future timeline. And in this bonus chapter, it tells the story of the final remaining warriors, Gohan and Trunks, in a post-apocalyptic world that's being controlled by 17 and 18, where all the other Z fighters have been wiped out. And one of the story elements that Toriyama loves to throw in here when it comes to the future timeline versus the present timeline is the absolute lack of Goku. The reason as to why Gohan never really achieved his true potential, at least what's mostly theorized, although it can be dissected and probably debunked in some ways because it's kind of lazy storytelling, but it somewhat makes sense, is the lack of Goku being there. Gohan never achieved Super Saiyan 2, he never got to his max potential like present Gohan did, and because of that, he became fodder to the future artificial humans. To me, it's always been a little weird that Gohan, with all these years of fighting, didn't develop his skills enough to beat them, but again, that's a dissection for a different day. Nonetheless, the lack of Goku being there to guide them has really affected the fact that they could not win this fight. And Gohan became Trunks' trainer by default because he was the last warrior left. Prior to this, before the timeline split, Toriyama had always given us glimpses and sneak peeks at Gohan's true power. From the very beginning when he fought Raditz onto the battles on planet Namek, Gohan has always showed an extraordinary amount of latent potential and was already being subconsciously positioned to be either the top fighter or one of the top fighters, possibly even number 2 behind Goku in the forthcoming Artificial Human Cell Saga. And of course, he wound up in the present timeline becoming the ultimate victor by killing Cell. But remember, Gohan was inspired by Goku speaking to him from the other world, from the afterlife, giving him the motivation to finally let out his full power and defeat Cell once and for all. So even though it was Gohan who did it, the father-son Kamehameha was symbolic of Goku passing his spirit down to Gohan and saying, hey, it's your turn now, dog. And to this day, I still find that to be beautiful storytelling. However, this did not happen in the future timeline. Goku did not get involved. And to be honest, it really is a bit of a plot hole. There was no reason for Goku not to have gotten involved from the afterlife and at least spoken to Gohan and Trunks and others and helped them out and try to figure out how to unlock higher forms like he did in the present timeline. It never really made sense to me, but future Gohan and Trunks were left on their own to battle these forces. And obviously, if you've seen the special or you've read the manga, you know that Gohan doesn't make it. But Gohan's sacrifice in the future would be an extremely important event in the life of Trunks, because had it not been for Gohan's sacrifice in the future, for Gohan dying, I wouldn't really call it a sacrifice. He went out to fight them by himself and spared Trunks' life. So it's not like he sacrificed himself like Goku did, but in a way, it's almost implied that he knew he was going to die. If you really kind of pay attention, it seems like he knew he might not make it back. So it was a form of sacrifice, but not really the same as Goku. Either way, his death in the future, when you really think about it, is one of the most impactful, if not the most important events to happen in that entire arc. You might be wondering why. Well, think about this. Had Gohan successfully defeated artificial humans 17 and 18, had he beaten them, there would have been peace, at least for a while until Goku Black, right? Trunks would have never had the impetus to go back in time to not only rescue Goku, but to eventually learn from Goku and his own father Vegeta to become a more polished fighter and a better warrior. And if those events had never happened, then the past would have suffered the exact same fate. There would never be a split timeline at all, and it would just be the one timeline, which means that Cell would have appeared at some point in the future with no 17 and 18 because they would have been killed by Gohan, and with no time machine, Cell could not go back in time. So because of that, the Cell timeline would have never happened, and it would have been a very different fate. Now, there's no way to tell how strong Cell would have been without 17 and 18. He would have maybe absorbed some people, possibly have been able to kill Gohan and Trunks because he did it in the Cell timeline. He's pretty cunning, and that would have been just another dark fate. So at the end of the day, as dark as it may sound, Gohan's death in the future was a necessity. It needed to happen. Even though Gohan's death may have birthed Cell going back in time because it would lead to the time machine being created and Trunks going back and then Cell stopping him in that timeline, it also would stop Goku from ever recovering from the heart virus, training Gohan to become the best possible version of himself that he could ever become, which would lead to him saving the world from Perfect Cell. So at the end of the day, Gohan needed to die to put these events in motion to eventually save the past, and the person who would save the past would be Gohan. I always found it interesting that the bottom line of this whole thing is Gohan made Gohan. Obviously, it was all unintentional. He didn't want to die, but that's the way these things happen. And although you can nitpick holes in the story, the reality is that Toriyama is really good at using causality, cause and effect, to tell his stories. And it really is a big factor in how Dragon Ball works. had this event not happened, despite how tragic it might be, the ultimate final victory, the ultimate moment of peace, which would of course lead to Trunks also learning how to become stronger, returning to the future and saving that future and liberating it as well. So ultimately, none of these events would have ever happened had future Gohan not died. Thank you so much for watching this edition of Dragon Ball In Depth. I hope that you enjoyed it very much, and I really enjoyed making it, and I appreciate all of you. And remember to take care of yourself and each other. Have a great day.